Hello and welcome. My name is Al Barrows, and this is UFO Disclosure, the podcast that's meant to show an average person's reaction to all of the UFO, UAP news from everywhere and anywhere. Today, I'd like to relate a story I saw on Beyond Creepy. It involves Richard Hathaway, who wrote his memoirs before dying, detailing his well-respected life in engineering. Included is a rather bizarre encounter he had as a child back in 1922. The story you are about to read is true, noted Hathaway in his memoirs. At this time, he lived with his parents and brothers in a small terrace house at the bottom of a village, which was located on Heaton Park. Heaton Park boasted a magnificent lake in which were 5 islands. This place was a magnet in summer for many school children. And although about 4 miles from home, a goodly number of children visited the park during the holiday. It was Wednesday, the 2nd of August, 1922, and Richard Hathaway, then 9, and his school chum, Leo Parks, also 9, were preparing for a day of fun. August the 2nd was Hathaway's birthday, and he and Leo had planned, weather permitting, to spend the entire day at the nearby Heaton Park. They were intending to spend a couple of hours on the lake and explore the park's various islands. The plan was to set out at about 9:30 a.m. His mother had prepared sandwiches and bottles of lemon juice for the boys. Everything was perfect. The boys set off down Bank Lane and immediately noticed that there was a mist in the valley. It seemed to be thicker over the long fields, but they didn't think much of it at the time. When they were in the fields, they were amazed to see a very large cylindrical-shaped object, rather like a long pipe with cone-shaped ends, very much like the nose of the Concorde plane. They thought it might have something to do with the nearby Air Force, a regular haunt of theirs. So they decided to investigate. As the two boys got closer, they saw that it appeared to be resting in midair, about 3 or 4 feet above the ground. As they came around the end of the object, they saw that there was a lot of holes, about 12-inch in diameter, in the end cone, and several tundish-shaped objects beneath the main body. They also noticed a suffused light that came from underneath. They felt no fear and decided to approach closer. When about 20 feet from the structure, they saw a large door slide open and people moving inside. They were about 5'6" in height and dressed more or less identically in two-piece suits with tunic collars. The clothes were in a lot of soft colors, and a few wore a headdress resembling a small turban. And it was easy to distinguish between the two sexes because one looked more gentle. They thought that the men looked sterner, but still gentle and kindly in appearance. They were all slim, and both sexes had distinctive white rings around their sleeves, which they both took to be some kind of rank. Their faces and hands looked delicate, their faces being oval in shape with large eyes and ivory skin. 2 people, one of each sex, came to the large opening and beckoned them to come closer. They personally felt no fear. As they approached, they felt they were walking up a ramp, although they saw no ramp at all. As they stepped inside, they were shocked when one of the figures, a lady, addressed them in English. "Welcome, Richard and Leo, to our ship." The two beings knew their names and showed them around the large room. In the center of the craft, there were a number of control panels, which would be called consoles today. People reading instruments and others lounging around on couches and tables. They told us this room was a common room, and that each person on the vessel had a small private lounge or bedroom. The two guides then took them into a small room and sat them down in front of a screen, which appeared to be projecting images of their insides onto the screen. Then they took them on a tour of the other rooms, including their own private quarters. Each of the private quarters comprised of a lounge with a table, a couple of chairs, a working desk, a bookcase, and various other bits and pieces. There was also a large screen on which country scenes were being projected. The boys recognized some of their own immediate surroundings. A curtained-off alcove contained control gear, which they were informed were for driving, navigating, and steering the ship. Other rooms were for controlling their armaments. Most of the control gear was way over their heads. A lot of it consisted of push-button indicator lamps, digital and analog OG instruments, mimic diagrams, and screens showing the actual operation of the particular plant being controlled. They told them the prime movers for the electrical generators were nuclear fusion devices, as opposed to nuclear fission devices, which the authorities on Earth would probably use for providing their energy sources in about the next 50 or 60 years. They said their system was intrinsically safe, whereas the system which would be used on Earth would be flawed. When Richard asked what the ship was made of, the beings responded that it was a special ductile substance which was mined on their planet. And when completed, it was many times the strength of steel. They asked how they knew their names when they asked them in. They said they knew by a system of thought transference they had perfected between themselves and found out their names by intercepting their thoughts. After the boys entered the ship, they noticed that not very many persons were actually speaking to each other, but were in fact communicating with each other by thought transference. They asked if it was their intention to make war on Earth, and their reply was definitely not. They said that their planet was dying. The total number of people on their planet was only 3 million. They said they were looking for a similar planet to Earth, unpopulated by humans. They thought that our planet was overcrowded already and that the people in general were very aggressive to each other as compared with themselves. They said that they came from another galaxy in the universe. The number of galaxies was without end, and many other planets and other galaxies were inhabited by strange creatures living in unbelievable environments. Creatures from other planets, from other galaxies of unimaginable appearance, had been spying on each other, except for us, from time immemorial. They said that our Earth would start spying within 100 years. They said that they had visited this planet over 100 years ago. Their planet, they told us, was light years away, but that they had perfected a system of place and distance transference which accounts for millions of light years and hours. They could not enlighten us any further as the human brain was not sufficiently developed. Being just kids, they admitted that most of what they had seen was over their heads, and they did not ask any more questions. They were in a state of wonder. They gave them some fruit and a shoulder hug and then sent them on their way down to the outside. As soon as they left the ship, the great door closed and the ship rose rapidly into the sky, and they walked back to where the ship had been. But there was not a trace of it ever having been there, only a few cows looking in wonder. Their day at Heaton Park was now off. They decided to keep the encounter to themselves for fear of being laughed at. It should be pointed out that Richard Hathaway was a man of impeccable credentials, and at 14 he landed at the Metropolitan Vickers. It's a factory in Manchester, one of the biggest and most important heavy engineering facilities in Britain and of the world. He was involved in railways, mining, and many other fields. During World War II, Hathaway was involved in the development of minesweepers at sea, using systems involving high currents to produce surges of magnetism to detonate mines. Richard Hathaway was considered a proper gentleman who was very precise and articulate, and not one to make up stories. Reading his journal, it seems he never spoke much about this event, but he must have thought about it a great deal as time passed. He was getting older, and he had the conviction to include this story in those pages so that it would not be lost. The fact that Richard Hathaway covered this in his memoirs means that it must have been really important to him, and it was signed over to his granddaughter, which shows that it was only meant for a handful of people to ever have seen. It's also interesting that this UFO encounter coincided with Hathaway's birthday. The two boys decided not to speak of what they had seen for fear of ridicule. It was 1922, after all. No one had ever heard of UFOs back then. And the description of the creatures is also very unique. It's very different from those reported today. And the interior of the craft is also very different. We have to remember that this story takes us back to a very different era in 1922. So back in 1922, when this happened, no one had even heard of UFOs yet. There were no sci-fi stories or shows on TV, so Richard couldn't have been influenced by them. The ETs also told the boys that we'd be using fusion power in the future. This came true. But what about the prediction about us spying on other worlds? Could this have come true? It's hard to say because the Pentagon is so tight-lipped about these secret programs. My name is Al Barrows. This has been UFO Disclosure. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks.